This is going to be a short, unscripted tutorial based on an email that I got about an asset, the BulletBoy asset. And this request is, it says, if I set the laser emit to 1 blast per second, how do I get the muzzle flash to match this? Now that's an interesting question because up until now, the muzzle flare, it only worked based on the start and end frame. I never expected to use this for anything more than a machine gun firing, but if you have just like 1 blast every second, of course, you don't want the muzzle going for every second. So as you can see, the behavior has been added. Oh, wait, I have to actually turn it on. So there's this new attribute here called only when emitting in the flare control object, which is the smallest of the three of the four control objects. And if you turn only when emitting to on, you can see the new behavior will be that it will only flare on the frames when it's emitting. Now, this was actually a little trickier to set up than I thought, because how do you query if an emitter is emitting on that frame? And of course, a single frame isn't enough. I've given it 4 frames. So when the bullet is emitting, it will be visible for the 4 frames after that frame. And actually, let me just do one quick little test to see if it works. If your rate is actually higher, let's turn that rate back up to 24. Okay, good. So that's working. So rate 24, it still works. But if you set the rate down to 1 and fire it off, there we go. So it's only flaring for when it's shooting. So I'm going to quickly show you. I was originally hoping to solve this with nodes, but in the end, it just wasn't really working. And this is actually one of my older assets. This was built back when I was doing a lot of stuff with expressions. So I went with expressions for this one anyways. So I put a new expression into the thing, and basically what this guy here is doing is if your frame is earlier than the start frame, than your start frame of the control object, then it resets everything. Then the next thing that happens is, well, what happens? It's using the emitter as a storage node and checking to see if on the current frame are there more particles than there were the last time it stored the particle count. If there are more particles, that means we are emitting on that frame, and yes, emission, turn on, and then we add. I'll show you what the storage container looks like. There are 3 attributes in the actual emitter. You can see there's one that says is emitting is on, my count, that's just like a storage node for how many particles it's remembered having, and the countdown frame. So basically, if is emitting is on, it will set the countdown frame to a certain number, and then if the current frame is lower than that number, the muzzle will be visible. So it's at 102, so now if we tap forward to 102, after that it's invisible. So if you play through, you can see, you can't see it updating on the fly, but if I tap through, you can see how it goes like that. Now, there's a caveat to this. This does not perfectly work, actually. And as of making this video, I haven't solved for all situations. One thing where it really doesn't like it is if your particle lifespan is, where the heck did I put this thing? This guy. If your particle lifespan is a, you can't have your lifespan being the exact same thing as the rate. So if your rate is 1 and your lifespan is 1, it's never going to be able to pick up that there are more frames from one frame to the next, because your one particle will be dying on one frame and then a new particle will be emitted on the next frame, and it won't be able to tell the difference. So to solve for that, you have to set your lifespan to be somewhat higher than your rate and not a round number. So rate of 1, lifespan of 2 will probably work for the first 2, but then start failing. 1, 2, there. Now it started failing. What you got to do is you got to set that to you got to offset it a tiny bit, 2.1. See if that works. Yeah, and the reason for that is if you have particles that are dying exactly on the frame, and you have emission that's happening exactly on the frame, there will be a frame where it won't be able to tell the difference between the first one and the last one. In this case, when it got up to 3 particles, well, when particle number 3 died, then the next particle... So, there's probably a smart way to get around this, but in order to not spend the entire weekend on figuring this out, that's how that works. So if you want to have that behavior where the muzzle is only visible when the things are actually emitting, you want to set only when emitting to on, By default, it's going to come in as off. You want to set that to on, and you want to set the lifespan to something higher than the rate and not make it a round number. So that should give you what you're looking for when it comes to that. The next thing I'm going to talk about is how do we bake out this asset. And since this is an instance geometry, that's going to be a little bit more tricky than usual. So the thing about this asset, which makes it a little bit tricky to cache out and reuse, is that in this asset, you're working with a couple of different things. You're working with end particles, you're working with instance geometry, and you're also working with geometry that's being hidden and shown. So I'm going to show you two ways as to how you might bake this thing out. The first way is kind of standard, but it may not have everything you need. But right off the bat, what we're going to do is we're going to bake out the particle information. So to do that, what you actually want to do is go into the setup group, and you want to find the particles group. And just to keep things simple, just select everything that's in here. These are all the end particles that make up the asset. So select all those guys. You want to be in your effects menu. You want to go over here to end cache, and you want to create a new cache with n objects. Open that guy up, and then you're going to figure out exactly what you want to do for this. For me, it's going to be, one file per frame, yes, time slider, whatever. I'm just going to hit that, create it, and I actually already did this once, so I'm just going to say replace the existing one here, and it's going to run through there, and we're going to see that it is going to probably work well. So now that I've cached that out, as I can scrub the timeline, and scrubbing will probably interfere with the expressions a little bit, but if you're playing normally, everything should still be working properly. It'll still be querying the count of particles, doesn't matter that they're cached or not. This is the downside of using expressions in Maya. In fact, using expressions is a really bad idea. As I mentioned before, this was built a long time ago, back when I didn't know any better, and I was still using expressions. So that's why I didn't have the intention to rebuild the entire asset for this feature. But in general practice, when you're building stuff in Maya, whether it's rigging or dynamics or whatever it is, expressions as a blanket statement are a very bad idea. If you can do it with nodes, you want to do it with nodes. But anyways, for reasons like that which I've just explained, scrubbing will make the visibility expression screw up. But typically we're not scrubbing, we're rendering, so it should work fine. So that's one way to do it. So now we have our particle group here, and it's been cached. So if I wanted to move it around, I could move the whole thing around, and the instances would probably follow along with me. Is that true? Yeah, it's looking good. So, that's one way to do it. And the other way to do it, which is probably more along the lines of what we're looking for, is a little bit more tricky. And it involves turning instance geometry into regular geometry. So for this part of the process, you're going to need a handy-dandy little script, which you're going to find. It's called, you want to find it by searching inst to geo. So if you just do a quick search, inst to inst to geo, and then make sure you tell, no, I don't want Instagram, I want inst to geo. The first thing that pops up, the first couple of things that pop up will be exactly what you're looking for. So you can grab it from Python Fiddle, or you can grab it from high-end 3D if you want to use that gem of a web page. You can use it from here. So just download that script, and you should be good to go. And stick that in one of your script folders. If I'm on Windows here, I haven't updated mine in a long time on my home computer, so I'm still Windows 2018. But you can see that I've stuck that somewhere in here. Where's InstaGeo? Where is it? I thought I just put that in there. Scripts. Arc InstaGeo right there. So you see I've dropped that into my Documents Maya 2018 scripts folder. Any scripts folder is fine. And then what you want to do is you want to run this command from arc instageo, import all, and then you want to run arc instageo. And that's going to pop up this little window here. And this is what you're really going to need if you're going to be if you want to be baking out instance geometry into something that you can use in another program. So to just make life simple, let's just go ahead and do it. So what do we got here? Duplicate hybrid instance, yes. Start from current frame, playback range, good. Okay. So I'm going to set this up like this. Now, what you want to do in this case is, when we were baking before, we were baking the particle. Now we're actually going to be selecting the instancer. And where do you find the instancer? You find the instancer actually in the render group. So the particles in the setup group, the instancers in the render group, which is the reason for that is the in the case of this asset, the instancer needs to be in the render group because that is what is getting rendered. So these guys here, Spark, Bullet, Flash, and Shell Geo, that's pretty much what we concern ourselves with within the render group. So we're going to select those, and with this window open, with our Arc InstaGeo open, we're just going to go ahead and convert, and we'll see what happens. It's going through, it's doing its thing. And if we're lucky, if we are extremely lucky, that's going to run through with no problems. And we crashed. Let me pause this playback, and we're going to come right back to where we were here. So hang on a second. Okay, getting back to it, I figured out what the problem is. Using this this third-party tool here, if you have an instancer or if you have instance geometry that actually doesn't produce anything, well, that can cause the machine to crash. And or that can cause the process to crash rather. In my case here, in this example, our bullets are just shooting off into space, and so the sparks that normally would get emitted when the bullets collide with an object, the sparks aren't being hit. So as I went in here and tried to bake all my instancers out, well, Spark never generates anything, so that's not good. We don't want that. In this case, all I want is the bullet geo. That's all I want. I just want the bullet geo. So same deal as before. We're going to run this script here from Arc InstaGeo import all, and we're going to run this guy right here to get our window up. And this is what we want. We want to do this now. We only want what actually is going to have visible results. So in my case, just the bullet geo here, just the bullet geo. Let me make this darker so we can actually see what's happening. And default options are fine. If you want to know what this does, hit help. Otherwise, just go ahead and hit convert with that selected. And we get some funny looking stuff, but that's okay. If we look down into our scene right now, we can see what we have here is we actually have a duplicate of what's happening, which is actual geometry. And that is what we're going to want to use to bake out as an alembic. And yeah, so if you get this, if you run this script right here, it's going to create a new group for you, which is going to work just fine. And then this guy, you can bake this whole group out as an alembic, and that's what you can bring in to your other scenes. Now, there's probably one or two other things I missed here, like how to include the actual muzzle flare here. But the heart of it is that you're either going to need to use end particle cache, or you're going to need to use, if you're doing instancing, this Arc InstaGeo script. Now, this asset, of course, the very, very best thing to do is to bring the asset into the scene and render it from the rig if you can. I know that doing rendering from instance geometry can be a pain in the butt, but that script should get you on your way to getting it working. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope this answers your question. If you have anything else you want to know about the rig, or if you need any new features added, feel free to send me an email, and I will try to get back to you within 24 hours.